The cameras were already rolling. Bright studio lights flooded the room, reflecting off polished glass tables and the carefully controlled smiles of the hosts. Across from them sat a man the world had spent 2 decades calling indestructible. The bald head, the quiet stare, the calm, lethal confidence of someone who had thrown himself off buildings, crashed cars through walls, and fought entire armies on screen. Jason Statham had built an entire career on being the man who never breaks. But on that day, something felt different. The conversation was supposed to be routine. Another promotional interview. Another stop on the long, exhausting press tour that follows every blockbuster release. The hosts asked about stunts, about action scenes, about how he keeps doing what younger actors can barely attempt. Then someone asked a question no one expected. What scares you now? For a moment, Statham didn't answer. The silence stretched just long enough to make the room uncomfortable. This was the same man who had jumped from skyscrapers in films like The Transporter, who had traded punches with Hollywood's toughest action stars, who had turned risk into entertainment for millions of fans around the world. Fear wasn't supposed to be part of his vocabulary, but the look in his eyes said something else entirely. Because behind the unstoppable action hero that audiences had watched for years was a reality far more complicated. A life that didn't begin with fame, fortune, or red carpets. A story shaped by pressure, relentless expectations, and a career that demanded his body pay a price most people would never agree to. And as the years passed, that price only grew heavier. By the time he approached his late 50s, the question was no longer about how many fights he could win on screen. It was about how much longer the man behind the legend could keep going. Because the truth about Jason Statham isn't just the story of an action hero. It's the story of a man who came from almost nothing, built himself into one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, and quietly carried the weight of a career that never allowed him to slow down. And to understand what really happened as Jason Statham approached 58, you have to start long before the fame. Back in the streets of England, where none of this was supposed to happen. Long before the explosions, the blockbuster films, and the global fame, the life of Jason Statham began in a place that looked nothing like Hollywood. He was born on July 26, 1967, in Shirebrook, a small town in Derbyshire, England. It was not the kind of place where people dreamed about becoming movie stars. Shirebrook was a working-class town shaped by factories, modest homes, and families that learned early how to survive through hard work rather than ambition. Statham's father, Barry Statham, was a street merchant who sold goods at local markets. His work was unpredictable and often physically demanding. His mother, Aline, worked as a dancer and later became a hairdresser. Their lives were practical, grounded, and far removed from the glamour that would eventually surround their son. Money was never abundant, but the Statham household had something equally influential: toughness. Jason grew up watching his father navigate the gritty realities of street trade. Selling on the streets required confidence, quick thinking, and the ability to deal with unpredictable situations. In many ways, those early observations quietly shaped the personality that would later define his screen presence. When Jason was still young, the family moved to Great Yarmouth, a coastal town in Norfolk. The environment there introduced him to something that would change his life completely: water. From an early age, Statham showed an unusual talent for diving. While other children played casually at the seaside, he developed an intense focus on the sport. The discipline required for diving was enormous. Hours of training, absolute control of the body, the courage to leap from high platforms again and again. By his teenage years, the sport had become more than a hobby. It became his identity. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, Statham competed as a member of the British national diving squad. For over a decade, he trained relentlessly, representing England in international competitions, including the 1990 Commonwealth Games in Auckland, New Zealand. At that point, his life seemed headed toward a completely different future. He wasn't thinking about cameras, scripts, or movie sets. His world revolved around training schedules, competitions, and the constant pressure to perform at the highest level. But even with that dedication, Diving was not a path to wealth or long-term security. Athletes often face an uncomfortable truth when their competitive years begin to fade. The world moves on quickly. And when Statham eventually stepped away from professional diving in the early 1990s, he found himself in a familiar situation. Back where he started, working odd jobs, selling goods on the street markets just like his father once had. Hollywood was nowhere on the horizon. At that moment, Jason Statham was simply another former athlete trying to figure out what came next. But within a few years, an unexpected opportunity would appear, one that would pull him out of obscurity and drop him directly into the center of the film industry. And it all started with a chance encounter that no one could have predicted. By the early 1990s, the life of Jason Statham looked nothing like the story of a future Hollywood star. His competitive diving career had ended. The years of training with the British National Diving Squad were behind him, and the structured life of an athlete had disappeared almost overnight. Like many former athletes, Statham suddenly faced a difficult question: what comes next? The answer at first was survival. He returned to something familiar. Just like his father had done for years, Jason began working on the streets, selling goods at market stalls around London. The work was unpredictable and often rough. It required confidence, persuasion, and the ability to read people quickly. Those skills would later translate surprisingly well into the world of acting, but at the time, it was simply a way to earn a living. Around this period, something unexpected happened. Statham's athletic physique and intense presence caught the attention of talent scouts in the fashion industry. In the mid-1990s, he began working as a model for several brands, including campaigns connected to the clothing company French Connection. Modeling was never meant to be his final destination, but it opened a door that would change his life completely. During one of these modeling projects, Statham was introduced to a filmmaker who was searching for fresh, authentic faces rather than trained actors. That director was Guy Ritchie. At the time, Ritchie was preparing his first major film, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, a gritty British crime story filled with street-level characters and dark humor. He wasn't looking for polished Hollywood performers. He wanted people who looked like they truly belonged in that world. And Statham did. There was something natural about him. The confidence, the tough demeanor, the ability to speak like someone who had actually lived the life his characters represented. When Statham auditioned, Ritchie reportedly asked him to pretend he was selling stolen goods. For Jason, that wasn't much of a stretch. He simply leaned into the same street market instincts he had used for years. The performance worked. In 1998, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels was released. The film became a cult success in the United Kingdom and introduced audiences to a completely new kind of actor. Statham wasn't polished or theatrical. He felt real. Ritchie cast him again 2 years later in Snatch alongside established stars like Brad Pitt and Benicio del Toro. For most new actors, sharing the screen with performers of that caliber could be intimidating. But Statham had something that couldn't be taught: presence. Audiences noticed him. Casting directors noticed him. And slowly, the film industry began to see that this former diver and street vendor had the potential to become something much bigger. Then came the role that changed everything. In 2002, Statham was cast as Frank Martin in the action film The Transporter. The character was calm, precise, and dangerous. A professional driver who lived by strict rules and possessed extraordinary fighting skills. The role turned Jason Statham into a global action star almost overnight. Unlike many actors in similar roles, he insisted on performing many of his own stunts. Years of diving training had given him exceptional body control, and he brought that physical discipline directly into his performances. The audience loved it. But what looked effortless on screen was only the beginning of a career that would push his body, his endurance, and his limits further than most actors would ever attempt. And as his fame grew, so did the expectations. Hollywood had discovered a new action hero. But the real test of Jason Statham's career was still ahead. By the mid-2000s, Jason Statham had quietly become one of the most recognizable action stars in the world. What made his rise unusual was that he didn't follow the traditional Hollywood path. He wasn't a classically trained actor. He hadn't come through prestigious drama schools or years of television roles. Instead, he brought something far rarer to the screen: authenticity. Audiences believed him. When Statham played a driver, a mercenary, or a fighter, it didn't feel like performance. It felt like instinct. That realism became the foundation of his career, and Hollywood quickly realized that he represented a new generation of action hero. After the success of The Transporter in 2002, the franchise expanded. The sequels, released in 2005 and 2008, strengthened his reputation as a dependable leading man capable of carrying an entire action film on his shoulders. Unlike many action stars who relied heavily on stunt doubles, Statham performed a significant portion of his own action sequences. Years of athletic discipline from his diving career gave him the physical precision required to execute complex choreography safely. But it was not only the Transporter series that propelled him forward. Films like Crank in 2006 showed a different side of his screen presence. The movie was chaotic, fast, and deliberately outrageous. Yet Statham's intensity kept it grounded. The character never slowed down, and neither did the performance. The film developed a strong cult following and further cemented his image as an actor willing to push boundaries. As the years passed, his career expanded into larger productions. In 2010, he joined a cast of legendary action stars in The Expendables, led by Sylvester Stallone. The film brought together icons of the genre, including Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jet Li. Despite sharing the screen with veterans of the industry, Statham did not disappear into the background. If anything, he represented the bridge between generations of action cinema. His style combined the raw toughness of classic action heroes with a modern, faster-paced physicality. Soon after, another massive franchise welcomed him. When he joined the Fast and Furious universe as Deckard Shaw, the scale of his global recognition grew even larger. The films placed him alongside stars like Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson, and the chemistry between the characters quickly became a highlight for audiences. From London crime films to billion-dollar Hollywood franchises, Jason Statham had reached a level many actors spend their entire careers chasing. To the public, his life looked almost perfect. Successful films, worldwide fame, a reputation as one of the toughest performers in modern action cinema. But behind that polished image, the pressure of maintaining such a physically demanding career was quietly building. Because the same quality that made Jason Statham unique, his refusal to rely on stunt doubles, would eventually begin to test the limits of his body in ways few people outside the industry could truly understand. And as the years passed, the risks behind the camera became harder to ignore. By the time Jason Statham had established himself as one of the most reliable action stars in Hollywood, audiences had grown accustomed to a certain expectation. If Statham was in the film, the action would feel real. Unlike many modern productions that rely heavily on digital effects and stunt doubles, Statham built his reputation on doing as much of the physical work himself as possible. For fans, that authenticity was thrilling. For the industry, it was impressive. But behind the spectacle, that decision carried serious risks. One of the most widely discussed incidents happened during the filming of The Expendables BA in 2013. The scene involved Statham driving a truck during an action sequence near the edge of the Black Sea in Bulgaria. According to reports from the production, something suddenly went wrong with the vehicle's brakes. Within seconds, the truck lost control. The vehicle plunged off the edge of the dock and into the water below. For a moment, the situation was terrifyingly real. The truck sank rapidly, and Statham was still inside. What happened next demonstrated just how much of his stunt work he truly handled himself. Thanks to his background as a professional diver and years of underwater training, Statham was able to react quickly. He managed to escape from the sinking vehicle and swim safely to the surface. Members of the crew later confirmed that if the driver had not possessed that level of physical control and underwater awareness, the accident could have ended very differently. The incident became one of the most serious on-set accidents in the franchise's history, and it highlighted a growing conversation inside the film industry. How much risk is too much? Statham had built his identity on physical authenticity, but every stunt carried consequences. Action films demand repeated impact, intense choreography, and long shooting days that push the body far beyond normal limits. As the years passed, the physical toll of that lifestyle slowly accumulated. Yet publicly, Statham rarely complained. In interviews, he often spoke about training, discipline, and preparation. His routine included martial arts practice, strength training, and intense conditioning designed to keep him performing at the same level even as he aged. Still, time is one opponent that no action hero can defeat forever. As Statham moved deeper into his 50s, many fans began asking the same question. How long could he realistically continue performing the kind of roles that had defined his entire career? At the same time, Hollywood itself was changing. Action films were becoming more digital. Younger actors were entering the genre, and the industry was increasingly aware of the safety concerns surrounding large-scale stunt work. For Jason Statham, the challenge was no longer just about playing the hero. It was about deciding how far he was willing to push himself to remain one. And as he approached the later years of his career, the consequences of that decision began to shape what the next chapter of his life would look like. By the time Jason Statham entered his mid to late 50s, he had already spent more than 2 decades doing something very few actors managed to sustain. He remained a leading action star. In an industry where careers often fade quickly, especially in physically demanding genres, Statham had done the opposite. Year after year, he continued to appear in major productions, performing high-intensity fight scenes, vehicle stunts, and complex action choreography that most actors half his age would hesitate to attempt. But maintaining that reputation came at a price. Action cinema demands relentless preparation. Every fight scene requires weeks of rehearsal. Every stunt sequence demands coordination between stunt teams, camera crews, and safety specialists. Even when everything goes according to plan, the physical impact on the body accumulates over time. Bruises become routine. Minor injuries become expected. Recovery takes longer with each passing year. Statham has often spoken about the discipline required to keep himself capable of performing these roles. His daily training routine includes strength work, mobility exercises, martial arts drills, and cardiovascular conditioning designed to keep his reaction speed sharp. It is not the kind of schedule most actors maintain once they have reached a comfortable level of success. But for Statham, the physical side of the job has always been part of his identity. Still, as he approached his late 50s, the conversation around his career began to shift. Audiences started to notice something remarkable. While many action stars transition into quieter roles or move behind the camera as producers, Statham continued to take on physically demanding parts. Films like Wrath of Man and later action projects showed that his presence had not diminished. If anything, his calm intensity had matured into something even more controlled and deliberate. At the same time, his personal life had become more stable than at any earlier point in his career. For years, Statham has been in a long-term relationship with model and actress Rosie Huntington-Whiteley. Together, they built a family life that stands in sharp contrast to the chaos often associated with Hollywood fame. The couple share children and spend much of their time away from the public spotlight, balancing family responsibilities with demanding careers. This quieter personal life may be one of the reasons Statham has been able to maintain his focus for so long. Unlike many celebrities whose careers are overshadowed by controversy or scandal, his reputation has remained relatively steady. Directors know what they are getting when they cast him: professionalism, physical commitment, and reliability. But even with that stability, the question surrounding his future has never fully disappeared. Action cinema is unforgiving. The body eventually slows down. Reaction time changes. Recovery becomes harder. The same risks that once felt manageable begin to carry greater consequences. For Jason Statham, the challenge now is not whether he can continue. It is deciding how long he should. Because every action hero eventually reaches a moment when the legend on screen must confront the reality behind it. And when that moment arrives, The most important question becomes what kind of legacy remains once the cameras finally stop rolling. After more than 2 decades in the spotlight, the story of Jason Statham is no longer just the story of an action star. It is the story of endurance. In an industry where trends change quickly and audiences constantly search for the next new face, Statham managed to build something surprisingly rare: longevity. Not through dramatic reinvention, not through constant publicity, but through consistency. From the late 1990s to the present day, his presence in action cinema has remained unmistakable. The formula was simple, but incredibly difficult to sustain. Discipline, physical commitment, and a refusal to fake what could be done for real. When audiences watched him fight, drive, or perform high-risk stunts, there was always a sense that what they were seeing required genuine effort. That authenticity created a connection between Statham and his viewers that many actors never achieve. It turned him into something more than just another Hollywood performer. He became a symbol of a particular kind of action hero. Not the superhero built with digital effects and impossible powers, but the grounded fighter who relied on skill, training, and controlled aggression. His characters were rarely flashy. They were calm, focused, and dangerous only when necessary. That quiet intensity became his signature. Over the years, he moved from British crime films into some of the largest action franchises in modern cinema. He stood alongside veterans like Sylvester Stallone in The Expendables and later joined the massive global universe of Fast and Furious, working with stars such as Vin Diesel and Dwayne Johnson. Yet through all of those projects, the core image of Jason Statham never really changed. He remained the same calm, controlled presence audiences had first noticed decades earlier in the gritty British films of Guy Ritchie. Now, as he moves further into his late 50s, the conversation around his career has shifted in a new direction. Not about whether he succeeded. That question was answered long ago. The real question is what comes next. Will Statham continue performing the kind of physically demanding roles that built his reputation? Will he eventually transition into mentoring younger actors, producing films, or stepping behind the camera himself? Or will he simply choose a quieter life away from the relentless demands of action cinema? Only he could decide that. But regardless of what the future holds, one thing has already become clear. Jason Statham's career represents something increasingly rare in modern Hollywood: a self-made path. A journey that began in a small English town, passed through the world of competitive sports and street markets, and eventually reached the global stage of blockbuster filmmaking. For millions of viewers, he will always remain the man who made action feel real again. And perhaps that is the most powerful legacy any action hero can leave behind. Because long after the explosions fade and the fight scenes end, the story of how Jason Statham built his career from nothing will still be remembered. Not as the story of a movie star, but as the story of a man who refused to stop moving forward.